Hey everybody, Mr. Duker here, back again with Super Simplified Social Studies, and today taking a quick look at the British acts that led to the American Revolution. If you remember, after the French and Indian War, England was pretty much bankrupt from having that big, long, expensive, wars tend to be expensive, 7 Years' War. That's how long it ended up being with France, and because the war was kind of begun in the colonies, because the colonies prospered, because they defended the colonies, it only made sense the colonies should have to pay for this. And so we start to see a lot of taxes placed on the colonies, and spoiler alert, Americans don't like to pay taxes. So that caused some friction, and these events is kind of what led us up to the American Revolution. It just wasn't one tax or act, there was many, and it gets kind of messy. So let's get started here. The very first one that was passed was called the Sugar Act, right? So before there was a tax on molasses. Molasses is kind of like the sticky, sweet residue. It's like a syrup that's left over from when you refine sugar. Used a lot for drinks and rum and stuff like that. Anyway, this was like a new version of the old Molasses Act, where it actually lowered the cost or the tax on sugar. I think it reduced the tax from 6 cents to 3 cents. So this should be a good thing. Actually, sugar became cheaper, but the problem is that you had a lot of Americans who don't want to pay any taxes, and so you had people smuggling. If you ever see that show like Moonshiners on Discovery Channel, right? People like making illegal liquor because they don't want to pay taxes on it. Same type of thing, right? This tax, because it made sugar more affordable, would cut into the profits of these like illegal sugar traders. So they didn't like that. Plus, they didn't like the fact that England could kind of boss them around and start paying taxes on things to, raise revenue. Where, this was an act designed to pay the bills, where before taxes are, keep government running, right? So colonists didn't like this, and they started to kind of organize to speak out and react to this by boycotting. Basically, they decided, well, we're just, again, not going to pay the tax by not buying your sugar. So we'll keep trying to smuggle. We'll find other ways to get our sugar, or ways that England won't know about. And then that way the tax isn't getting paid, and then they're not getting any money. And so what's the point, right? And so these boycotts, they organize, they stop buying, and it actually works. The Sugar Act ends up going away. And this kind of sets precedent early on. The colonists realized that if they work together as a group with one unified voice, they can kind of coerce or force England to listen to them. And so in the future, they're going to go back to this quite a bit. Every time new taxes are placed on the colonies, they're just going to go back to these boycotts, finding ways not to use these goods, avoid paying taxes, to stick it to England, to show their anger and displeasure, and to try and get these taxes to go away. So again, because this ends up working in the beginning, they're going to keep doing this over and over again with sometimes mixed results. However, it's a problem. England still needs money, and because the Sugar Act caused so many problems, they come back with another tax called the Stamp Act, right? This is not a tax on stamps, even though many students think it is. It's actually a paper tax, right? So the idea was, if you were to use any paper at the time, I don't care if it was an envelope for a letter, playing cards, newspaper, wallpaper, stationery, whatever it was, you had to pay a tax on that paper. To show you paid the tax, they would put a stamp on it that shows that the tax was paid. It was a legal piece of paper, basically, and that you were in good shape. But if you had paper without a stamp on it, that was illegal. You weren't paying the taxes on it. You could get in trouble. So again, the colonists would try and boycott this as best they could. And we see a lot of recycling, right? You need paper to get things done at the time. So people would like tear off the wallpaper from their walls and write letters on that. They would, again, reuse and recycle things as best they could. And again, trying to avoid paying the tax by avoiding, using English goods or paying for that stamp on English paper goods. And so we have the Stamp Act, again, also very unpopular. Now, as these boycotts are gaining strength and they're growing in number, they're being organized largely by a group of men who call themselves the Sons of Liberty. These are a mixed bag of guys. They're kind of troublemakers. They helped to organize boycotts and provided leadership. But a lot of times, these were the results of some intoxication that would come from meeting at the local pubs and bars in the afternoon. So these guys would get a little rowdy. Sometimes they would organize boycotts. Sometimes they would antagonize and start attacking tax collectors to stop them from doing their job, to stop them from collecting taxes, maybe harassing them, throwing rocks through their windows at home, sometimes tarring and feathering tax collectors, which is very painful. You pour hot, sticky tar on somebody, and then you cover them with like feathers from a pillow or mattress. They look like a giant chicken. That may sound kind of humorous, but this is hot, scalding tar, and that basically, to peel it off, it peels the skin off your body. It causes burns on your body. Very painful. It can kill you. Not a great thing the Sons of Liberty were doing. But again, they kind of lead the charge in organizing these anti-British actions. But they are kind of rabble-rousers. They are kind of troublemakers, and they get into some trouble through this organization. Now, as these taxes are failing, England will come back again with this time a whole group of taxes called the Townshend Acts, right? So Sugar Act didn't work, Stamp Act not very popular, so now we're going to do a tax on a lot of different things. The idea here was to tax kind of common everyday items the colonists would use in their everyday lives. Tea, definitely taxed, but it was also taxed on like things like lead, glass, paper, paint, again, the things that you just kind of needed, the materials that people use to make and build things at this time. And surprise, it was also very unpopular. Like with the Sugar Act, this put a tax on tea, and this actually lowered the taxes on tea at the time. So the tax on tea effectively made tea cheaper. But again, it's the principle here. The colonists are very upset because, again, everyone drank tea. It was a very common, almost necessary item that people needed in their daily lives. And if England could tax tea, well, what are they going to tax next, right? So this caused a lot of anger. And this is kind of when Americans start to boycott tea, and we become a nation of coffee drinkers as a substitute drink besides tea because there was no coffee tax. But again, people are very angry and outraged, and they will do something about this Tea Act here very, very soon. In the meantime, though, like I said, we have a lot of rabble-rousers causing problems with these taxes and getting them collected. So England had actually sent some soldiers into Boston, where a lot of this hotbed of activity was happening, to kind of try and police and keep these rowdy colonists under control. There was a lot of English soldiers who got sent here to keep the peace, and surprise, they did not often get along with the colonists, which leads us to the next action in this escalating scale here called the Boston Massacre. Very, very famous. But basically, one cold winter morning, you had a group of colonists who had kind of organized and causing some issues. Some soldiers had come up to tell them to go home and disband. The people refused. It was kind of a staring contest for a while. These unarmed colonists throwing rocks at these guys and names and snowballs. And what happened was one of these soldiers felt that they were in trouble. They felt unsafe. Maybe they just had a slip of the finger, but they ended up discharging their gun. And when one person fires a gun, everybody else follows suit. And so these soldiers ended up firing almost point blank into the crowd of these kind of a mob of protesters. And some of them were actually killed. This is huge because these soldiers who were sent to protect the colonists are now killing them in the streets. And this is a huge, I don't want to say propaganda victory because that makes it sound like it was a good thing. But this story is spread all over the colonies, all over the newspapers. This is actually a famous kind of woodcut by Paul Revere, showing the incident, because remember, there were no cameras back then, but showing people who weren't there what happened. And it makes the colonists very, very angry and upset, rightfully so. This is not what England, again, they're killing us in the streets. Is that what this has come to? So it really angers a lot of colonists, kind of wakes them up that maybe England isn't the protecting force they thought it was. These soldiers end up getting put on trial, but they just basically get a slap on the wrist, which also, in a slap on the wrist from English courts, just goes and angers the colonists even more, that these guys really weren't ultimately punished for their action of killing these kind of innocent people, unarmed people definitely, unless you count a snowball as a weapon. But this is not helping things at all between England and the colonies. What will make matters even worse, of course, then after the Boston Massacre, is the Boston Tea Party. So again, it's the Sons of Liberty kind of causing some trouble here, showing their displeasure. And so one morning, they would dress up as Native Americans to hide their identities. That's why they're dressed up here as such on the photo, the painting. Board an English ship full of tea and basically throw it all into Boston Harbor, causing millions of dollars in damage. This is basically kind of a colonial act of terrorism, right? If someone was to go walk into like a Walmart today and just start destroying all the products in the store, causing tons of damage, that's what basically happened here. It is an act of terrorism, basically, committed again by the Sons of Liberty to cause some problems with England. Why are they dressed up as Native Americans? Probably because ski masks weren't around. Again, they want to hide their identities so they can't get in trouble and no one can easily identify who these guys were. It was just a disguise to hide their identity. I don't think the real Native Americans cared much about taxes or tea. But England is incredibly upset. This is escalation on the colonists' part. You just can't go around destroying property, private property, because you're pissed off about the tax on tea. And so there will be repercussions that come from this, in the form of the Intolerable Acts, or sometimes called the Coercive Acts. Now, these are a little different. Well, the acts before were there to try and raise revenue, to try and get money. These acts are definitely a punishment, to punish Boston for the Tea Party and to kind of try and put the colonies back in check and under control. So there's a lot of acts that make up the Intolerable Acts, but again, these are punishments. So basically, it's a package deal. One of the acts is they close down Boston Harbor, right? If you can't use it responsibly, then nobody's going to use it. And so all the ships in Boston Harbor were not allowed to leave, and no more ships were allowed to come in unless they were like English ships. Basically kind of stranding people there. If you were a merchant or a trader, and this was your business, shipping is how you made your money, you are now out of a job because England isn't letting you go and trade like you used to. They also shut down some of the government in Boston as well, taking away the people's right to kind of assemble and have their own little self-governments. Also, the Quartering Act comes around at this time. So all of these soldiers in Boston, if they need a place to stay, they're now allowed to legally go into your home and make themselves comfortable. If they want to get out of the rain, if you're cooking dinner, it smells good. If they want a place to sleep, you got a lot of soldiers and not enough places for them to stay. So now the colonists had to let them in, and that is an extreme invasion of privacy. And at any time, just a soldier could walk into their home, your home, and make themselves comfortable. So again, these are very much a punishment, and this is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. After England showed how punishing, I guess you could say, they would be willing to go, it wakes the colonists up. And even colonists outside of Boston in the other colonies realized, hey, if they could treat Boston this badly, Massachusetts this badly, who's to say that we aren't next? So you know what? This affects people in Virginia. This affects colonists in Georgia and Pennsylvania as well. And it's been building for a while, but the colonists realize this is everybody's problem. All of their rights are being infringed upon. England could oppress any of them at any time, and they need to unite to try and find a way to deal with this English problem, which will lead into the First Continental Congress, where the colonies try to kind of self-organize and as a whole talk about how they're going to deal with England. But that's a video in another chapter coming forward in American history. So hopefully this was a little helpful. Again, there's a lot of acts. They're easy to get confused, but these are the main ones and the order they kind of escalate in that leads to Congress, which will soon then lead to the Revolution. But the acts are important because without these, the Revolution would have looked very different and probably would have happened a little bit later than it did. So again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Hopefully this helped you in your classes. And this is Mr. Duker. I will catch you later.